Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Vishal Mathur. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at the Telecom Infra Project. Today, I have a guest star, Suman Kanuganti, the CEO and founder of Personal.ai. Hey, Suman, how you doing?
Hey, Vishal. Nice to be here.
Nice to Thank you very much for joining today. Ladies and gents, Suman and I are going to have a bit of a chat about Personal.ai, as well as his reflections on what's happening in the telco industry and how telcos can grab an opportunity when it comes to looking at distributed inferencing and monetization of their edge AI specifically. Let's just start with the simple question. Suman, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background and tell us a bit about Personal.ai.
Yeah, myself, I'm an engineer, Suman Kanuganti, founder and CEO of Personal AI. Been on this journey for 5 years now, more than 5 years now for Personal AI, with this core mission of creating a private personal agent with memory for every person on the planet. By background, I have master's in robotics. I have a master's in MBA. I built a company called Ira, also an AI company back in 2015 for people who are blind and low vision. As part of my work at Ira, I did do a lot of dynamic traffic management work, prioritization work on the network. So that got us more and more into telco and the overall network related strategies for the telcos.
Mm-hmm.
As an engineer myself, my first job was at Qualcomm, and during the time I was also working on streaming videos, live TV on 3G network before, the iPhones existed. So that was a Verizon project, for low latency, high streaming. How do you actually deliver the packets onto the edge, over these networks? So long story short, I'm a generalist combination of engineering background, a lot of telco background, as well as startup background, bringing AI solutions into.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Good illustrious background. And this is probably quite fitting for the conversation we're going to have because the audience in mind are telco operators, and you obviously understand them pretty well from your background. We'll get into personal AI in a second, but just for the audience here, let's back up a little. So the context is there's already pragmatic development around distributed inferencing architectures. And I guess looking for ways for monetization of edge AI. And some operators are already offering compute or GPU as a service through sovereign AI factories, where GPU hours and utilization are being monitored and monetized, etc. And I guess, when we hear at GTC, like, NVIDIA talks about the AI grid, and there's a real sort of movement in that direction, which actually maybe opens up an evolution in AI tokenization, as enterprises and maybe end consumers start to want to look at production ready applications with metered token consumption and SLAs, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you could give me your personal reflections. What are the end user experiences going to look like, and what can telcos start to do now and to move into this sort of new world of token as a service?
Yeah, all I will say is a lot of this is super fascinating in regards to how things are evolving and the opportunity ahead of us. If you start with the core fundamental value propositions and opportunities, use cases and problems, and then tie it back into the edge inferencing and the technology, I think that will start to make much more sense, right? So if you think about, like, traditionally, we got 2 to 3 decades of internet, and we have before that have the core primitives of talk, text, and then moved on to data. The interesting thing with talk and text is talk and text was purely language as a core primitive. People were exchanging language by talking to each other, and then once we have SMS or text messaging, there is, yes, communication, its simplicity asynchronously, but you also have some programmability, where you text a valet guy to get your car back. And with data, what was interesting is data was a core primitive that unlocked essentially all the apps, right?
Hmm.
So if you now start thinking about the payloads associated with the data is like APIs and JSON payloads, and internet communication between multiple different apps, multiple different services, human to human, human to service, and service to service, right? So okay, now we have ubiquitous AI, and we generally tend to understand the benefits of agents communicating with each other, because at the end of the day, now you don't have to communicate code or communicate payloads, you communicate language, you communicate the intent, right? So with that in the sense, is the core primitive tokens? And I strongly believe the answer is yes for that. So if the core primitive is tokens, then you have underlying asset on the network rails or carrier rails that is tokens that kind of makes the agents more programmable, right? So the data give us apps, and tokens will give us agents. That is all not. Now, then the question is, okay, hang on, that sounds great. Why can't a hyperscaler do it? Why can't a cloud do it, right? The question is, they can, but it's going to be a poor experience. Why? One of the core assets that carrier has is the identity, is
Okay.
knowing who the user is, knowing who the customer is, that consumer who has the phone number, and combining the identity, the authorization, and starting to bring in the layer of a platform free, a privacy oriented, authenticated, and trusted agent on the network that works on your behalf, irrespective of what ecosystem you are in, with other service agents or for your own behalf, is, I think, a huge unlock for multiple streams of revenue, plus creating a highly, trusted sets of agents and AI value out there in the market to the consumers.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's cool. So let's go to personal AI. And I guess you're heading in that direction. Tell me a little bit about the value proposition you're bringing to the table then.
Yeah,
And where does
sure.
that fit in?
I see definitely through the lens of personal AI in the telco market, right? The opportunities that I see and work with carriers are geared towards, mass market unlock, right? What does it mean to that, 200 million consumers out there in the country who has a phone number? What does AI experience mean to them, right? Today, we are essentially kind of locked into single platform oriented like AI experiences, and not all consumers has the benefit of it. So our focus is twofold. Our focus is how do we create mechanisms to create a highly private, highly scalable, right, personal agent that is attached to a individual or a thing, right? You take any connected thing, like a connected phone, a connected
Yeah.
robot, a connected
Yeah.
car, right? Currently, they have day to day creating newer information, newer data. So we essentially take personal AI architecture to create an evolving AI around a thing, right? So Vishal, your phone number will turn into an AI phone number, fielding in for you, learning you every day. It is private to you. It has relationships that you have with the people. It is platform free, not independent of any of the specific hyperscalers. Now, once you start thinking about the scale of this particular solution, then okay, the current existing technologies such as context windows over LLMs, where as you squeeze in more memory, the economics wouldn't make sense. There is much more variability involved, as you push in more memory for millions of people, to a centralized cloud. You will have non-deterministic experiences where sometimes AI may be speaking within less than 500 milliseconds, and sometimes it may be speaking in 2 to 5 seconds. And the reliability is one of the core propositions of the network, right? So the idea of creating reliable experiences comes with the solutioning, which is the AI grid and the distributed inferencing, because suddenly what you're now doing is, through the lens of personal AI, we are now deploying these micro workloads that is closer to the user, that represents a user, without having to, pretty much fall back into the traditional ways of doing things, where you're taking memory into a bloated LLM, over cloud, that becomes exponentially costly, where unit economics wouldn't make sense, right? So if you start, going from the problem and the scale, the issues at hand, the experiences, and then work backwards, the edge inferencing and the distribution inferencing would make perfect sense, because we will only have more connected things into the future. We will only demand more agent communication that needs to happen, right? We only want higher reliable, higher experiences. We don't want to deal with latencies. And that's all the problems that, personal AI offers from a use case, and then offers a technology that is scalable on grid, creating those monetization opportunities.
Okay, amazing. Okay, so let me just try and I'll give it a go to summarize a few sort of very specific points you made. Personal AI, attach an AI identifier to every MSISDN, for example, that allows you to have, as an individual, a personal AI agent that works for you.
On the network.
The multiple. Okay. The second thing is distributed inferencing, or an AI grid, is a smooth way to efficiently manage the multiple workloads, micro workloads that will come through eventually at scale through an infrastructure. And rather than putting them into very expensive data center or cloud, you can look at other mechanisms. So it's an orchestration engine in that regard. Number three, there's got to be a belief that actually there will be scalability. So a telecom operator not only becomes an efficient distributor of inferencing, but also a service provider that can offer services to end customers in this regard. Basic
Yeah,
points, am I right?
100%. So if you start thinking about, okay, where exactly the value of personal AI can be benefited, like right now, right? To your point, let's just say you do have a personal agent on your existing phone number, right? Not an ODT provider, not a forwarding solution, not a one way, right? It's actually on the network that is tied to your identity where your AI can pretty much like handle missed call on your behalf, who knows the relationship that is surrounding you, right?
Yeah.
So at the basis, like when you have tokens as your core primitive as part of your subscription plan,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
already have out of the box value where your evolving AI that is private to you is handling and fielding in, missed calls. It's a glorious way of like the traditional voicemail, right? Because now it's
Got
kind of
it.
learning,
Okay.
being
Yeah.
maintained, your context and your relationships that is not tied into a specific Google platform or OpenAI platform or any other platform, right? Because platforms are what? Platforms are interested in locking you into their ecosystem. What are carriers do? Carriers have certain regulations that they need to adhere by. There are certain SLAs and reliability that they need to provide. There are certain privacy regulations that they need to promise to the consumer. So it is a trusted party. Those are two different businesses. So
Mhm.
so the first of the business is, yes, there is like value out of the box with a personal agent that is tied and authorizable, trusted, authenticated source. The second order of the business is now if you start thinking about for a consumer, I'll give you an example. Like, you pick up the phone and make a phone call to someone, and you pick up the phone and you make a WhatsApp call to someone. Okay. Either way, you and me are having a conversation, but the underlying primitives are different, which is one is data and the other is network, right? So if you start applying that lens where the supporting LLMs or models could be many forms, but however the consumer doesn't need to care how their value is being created with the AI, right? Eventually, so if you avoid or if you remove that barrier for the consumer to make a choice, is like, I don't understand between cloud and open AI and things, right? But there is intelligence associated with it. Like very similar approach to kind of Apple, right? Apple doesn't tell which model they're using behind the scenes, but network has an opportunity to do that at the network layer to provide this platform-free appless experiences. The final opportunity is now you're starting to think about like agent to agent communication.
Mm. Mm.
You have an authenticated personal agent on the network that is working on your behalf. You want to get a ride, you open an app such as Uber. You want to make a transaction, you open an app such as bank. You want to book a transportation or a hotel, you go to their specific website or open specific apps, right? If you now start thinking about an appless world, right? Because now AI can communicate. We used apps because people cannot communicate with the computers. We had to use our
Yeah.
touch screen, right?
Yeah.
Now we can communicate with each other. So your personal agent will communicate with Uber AI, service agent to settle the transaction directly on the network. So the convenience factor that you are trying to that you push to the consumers in its entirety is just massive, right? And it's a trusted convenience where you are not locked into one ecosystem. So it's appless, it's platform free, it's private, right? It's monetizable directly on the carrier rails where, talk, text, data. And now after 20 years, we have tokens as the
Tokens.
new
Yeah. As the
opportunity
new prem.
in
Yeah.
that ecosystem.
Which, of course, they would need to probably make changes within their billing systems, etc., to try and make sure that they can build that in. But it to your point, it can be hidden from the end consumer. It doesn't matter.
Right,
It's
right.
just a different form of transaction now in
And
that
the
regard.
billing systems, there are multiple strategies, right? I mean, it's a business decision, not necessarily a technological decision. In other words,
Yeah.
carriers have programs like one plan programs, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
basically, hey, consumer doesn't need to worry about unlimited data, phone lines, family gets an account,
Hmm.
boom, 5 lines, 10 lines, we don't care. This much data, we don't care. This many tokens, we don't care, right? But then you start creating the value centered around the, call it the bundle, and the ecosystem grows, which increases your ARPU on a per account basis, you know,
Yeah.
call it 20, 30% now. but exponentially or double into the future.
Okay, very good. Listen, we're going to be wrapping up now, but I do have another question for you, which is, I mean, I know within Telecom Infra Project, we're very keen to work with companies like yourself and, the NVIDIAs and Intels of this world with the carriers and with infrastructure providers and try and showcase at least proof of concepts of these types of, ideologies that you have, and then show reference architectures and a marketplace of great solutions. Have you had any through personal AI? Have you got any sort of proof of concepts moving or any sort of case studies that you could share a little bit?
But yeah, 100%. So at GTC in March at NVIDIA, we have put out and validated some of the core technical um, concepts on the AI grid with Comcast and NVIDIA. There are
Okay, good.
three key core capabilities that we showcased. One is the economics associated with the small language model when running on the grid is 40 times more token efficient than you know comparable hosted solutions with same set of use cases. The second core capability that we also showcased was as the memory expands or evolves over a period of time for a identity and for end user, the latency and the deterministic nature of those responses stays essentially deterministic, right? So that is another capability that we also showcased at NVIDIA GTC. So, at the end of the day, we will continue to put the best technology that is network optimized because the workloads that are native to the network are different than the internet workloads. We can get into the details on a technical conversation at some other time. But once you start thinking about, you know, net, network workloads, you need to have much more sophisticated optimizations that require, high reliability, better latencies, to bring those experiences closer to the user.
Fantastic. Wonderful. I look forward to you hopefully coming to Fuse in Seattle. That's our annual event. And maybe bringing that case study to Fuse as well. I think there would be a lot of genuine interest when we're talking about the broad topic that we've been discussing today at Fuse. So hopefully we can get yourself and the team across there. That would be really good. Suman, thank you very much. Is there anything else you would like to add as a part of,
I had
and
fun. I mean, I think I'm in the industry. I think career opportunity at this time is fascinating, just beyond monetization. The level of and the kind of impact that they can make is tremendous, and I wish every career will have opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Suman. I really appreciate it. And thanks for really introducing personal AI as well as your sort of thought process on and the scalability and the opportunity set that is there for the telco industry. We'll obviously be promoting this out on our LinkedIn page and YouTube's as well, but also let's just make sure we introduce your company through that as well. So look
Sounds
forward
good.
to having a little bit more promotion on that and seeing you in Seattle, hopefully as well. Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Suman.
look forward to seeing you in Seattle.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.